Welcome back, everybody. This is Chad with Iraq Veteran 8888. Today we're going to pull apart a very, very dirty girl. This is a 22 caliber dedicated AR upper using the CMMG 22 conversion kit on a M16 lower kindly provided by KG Made Suppressors. We were out doing a little bit of shooting with this thing. And when I say a little bit, I mean like 3,000 rounds of 22. So we decided to send it back to them clean. So they were nice enough to hang out while we actually film a video on this process for you guys and just kind of show you how dirty an AR-15 can get under somewhat extreme circumstances, and kind of how to go about cleaning them and inspecting components that might wear and tear and such. But if you guys want to learn more about gunsmithing and assembling firearms and such, building your own, there's a great resource out there that we've talked about in the past, Sonoran Desert Institute. You guys have heard them mentioned in previous videos. We've done a lot of work with SDI in the past, and they have an excellent curriculum for aspiring gunsmiths. If you guys want to check them out, just head over to the website and give them a little peek. If you guys have unused GI Bill, you can also use that to further your schooling and get an education in gunsmithing. But without further ado, ARs aren't really the most difficult thing to quote-unquote gunsmith. It's literally just a pile of parts that you put together and take apart when you need to. But we're going to get on the bench here and we're going to start pulling components out and just show you how skanky these things can really get over time. And then also we're going to be pulling the suppressor apart. And this is a, like I said, a dedicated rig, and it runs 100% suppressed all the time. This is a Liberty Centurion that I had custom made with a 22 caliber bore, and this is all titanium. This entire can weighs just over 7 ounces if I remember correctly. Even the mount is titanium, but it can get very dirty, as you can hear. That's all lead just floating around inside that can, so it definitely needs to be pulled apart and cleaned. So we're going to do that today as well. We will be utilizing a Lyman Power Pro Ultrasonic. When guns get this dirty, you can clean them by hand, but it's much easier to drop all the components into an ultrasonic cleaner and then just get all that gunk off of there, blow all the water off and the solution off, and then re-oil everything and just inspect all the components in a nice clean manner, and go from there. So without further ado, we're going to get on the bench top here and we're going to pull this thing apart and show you guys the inner workings. All right, guys, I've done my PPE here. When you're dealing with 22s and a lot of lead deposits, you definitely want to protect yourself. You don't want that stuff soaking into your hands and skin and everything. I also keep some lead wipes laying around most of the time and lead soap. So if you do get some lead contact or whatever, it's easy to kind of get it off your fingers. Anyways, what we're going to do here is just pull this sucker apart and just kind of see exactly what we're talking about here and how nasty this thing really is. So look at the lower. You see a lot of crud built up back here in the buffer assembly. This is you typically don't need the buffer, obviously, for 22 use. You could just take it out of there, but it's nice to have a little bit of pressure on the kit, which we'll pull apart in a moment. If you look down inside the receiver where the trigger group, fire control group, and everything is, you can see just a lot of just powder deposits, lead deposits, all kinds of just dirty mess down in there. Also, when an AR gets dirty enough, the last round bolt hole open here and release, it can actually get bound, so it won't function properly if enough carbon and other deposits and crap get down in there and it's not properly lubricated. But aside from that, the lower is not too bad. I mean, as you can see, just to give you an idea of the gunk that is down in here, let's just take a Q-tip and just kind of rub it around a little bit. Now if you are cleaning something like this by hand, you know, you basically just spray yourself some carbon destroyer or some sort of gun oil or CLP or whatever cleaner that you decide you want to use. Spray it down in here, run it around with some Q-tips and some soft bristle brushes and such. And you can take an air compressor and you can literally just blow this stuff out, preferably outside. You don't want that stuff floating all over your shop. But blow it out and just kind of continue to repeat that process until you get it, mostly clean. The magazine well can be cleaned out as well. There's a lot of deposits and stuff that'll get built up in there, and it'll make inserting the magazines over time kind of rough and such. You definitely want to keep that clean. Just a few choice areas, but as you can see, 3,000 rounds gets quite nasty when it comes to 22s, and it's quite a bit of rounds through this thing in one sitting. But what we're going to do is just pop this buffer out of here, and we're going to drop pretty much the entire lower in the Sonic, just to maintain that ease of use here. And we are going to pull the stock off as well. Really a big fan of these BCM stocks here. But this whole assembly will get dunked into the Sonic, and that'll get in here and clean out all these little areas, all the areas around here, around the auto sear, and the rest of the fire control group. If we drop the hammer, you see deep down in there, the disconnector and the trigger itself, just how much stuff is bound up in there. Definitely dirty. Let's take a look at the upper. Now, we're just going to unscrew the can. We'll pay attention to the can in a minute here. And we're going to pull this little Coltac wrap off. This is this is actually a suppressor wrap that we stuck on here because this rail was getting quite warm, so we use that to protect our hands. But as you can see, the barrel assembly on this is only a 4.5-inch barrel, and this is actually the same upper that we've been running for quite a while. This is my upper that we shot early on in a video a couple years back when I first built it, and this is the same upper that we actually melted down in the 22 meltdown video we did with the KG-made Swarm suppressor. And eventually we're going to revisit this and just run it loud and proud and just see what it'll do, just to have a little bit of fun again, because, I mean, shooting 22 with an M16 lower, I don't really think much else gets more fun than that. But as you can see here, this is the CMMG 22 kit. When you buy the barrel and bolt kit, this is what you are presented with. It does have a specialty barrel that uses this collar, and the collar has the feed ramp built into it and everything like that. This actually inserts over a protrusion through the upper receiver. You can see the barrel in there, and the collar literally slides right over that, and that is actually your 22 long rifle chamber. This is the bolt itself. You have your extractor and then your firing pin. Now I will say on these, the firing pins are definitely consumable items. Typically in my experience with this particular setup, this rig has had at least 16,000 rounds, if not more, probably closer to 18 to 20,000 rounds through it at this point. And I've replaced the firing pin several times, at least 5 or 6 times. Ray has actually taken one of the broken firing pins and put it on the lathe and drilled a recess in the front of the pin, and then dropped a piece of hardened drill rod in there, and then reshaped the firing pin tip itself. And it seemed to last a little bit longer, but it's just, these things are just going to break firing pins over time. He even produced a solid beryllium copper pin as well, and it lasted about the same as the standard steel pins that you can buy in bulk from CMMG. We're going to pull this assembly right here apart in just a moment. This is the rail that the bolt itself rides on, like such. You can see how dirty that thing is. So we're going to just drop all this stuff in the Sonic and clean it. This right here, this little protrusion here, is your ejector itself. So it's built into the assembly. And then your recoil spring assembly and your guide rod. The recoil springs will shrink over time. Usually these, it seems like this one has shrunk a little bit. It's probably lost about ½ an inch. You start having cycling problems and such when you're running this thing over time. The springs are easily bought and replaced, so that is definitely a consumable item. In order to run this on an M16 lower, basically run an auto trip. This is a small, just pressed piece of sheet steel, and this little ledge right here is what actually engages with the auto sear on the M16 system. And then this is an anti-bounce weight. It just helps keep the system running smoothly and everything, and keeps the bolt from bouncing and causing issues with cycling and feeding and function. This is a specialty charging handle that CMMG sells for the 22 kit. You can run into some problems if you use a standard AR charging handle where the brass itself will not eject properly, and it'll get stuck inside the cutout here where the gas key normally slides within the upper receiver and inside the charging handle. So brass can get stuck in there, and then you can have a kind of an override situation where you're going to have to pull the entire thing apart and get that piece of brass out of there. This polymer charging handle kind of negates that problem, but as you can see, she is nasty. I mean, she's been rode hard and put up wet. When we look inside the receiver itself, just a lot of buildup and deposits of lead and just carbon, unburnt powder, just all kinds of mess inside there we're going to get out. Like I said, you can use standard conventional cleaning methods to clean these out. It's not a problem. With something like this, I would use a large brush similar to maybe a 12 gauge shotgun brush. Soak this down, let it sit for a while, and then you can clean that out with a good solid brush. If we take a Q-tip again and just kind of dig in here, you guys can see just all the nasty that we're going to be getting out of there. You can see further back inside the receiver, it's a little bit less dirty. Most of the buildup and deposits are going to be right where the bolt opens up and everything, just like on any blowback 22. You guys know, if you're watching this video, you know 22s can get increasingly dirty over time. You can see the shell deflector here, which is more like a gas deflector for the 22. It's been beat up a good bit. But we're going to pull the Trijicon ACOG off of this setup. This has a lower mount on it. I've never had a problem with this system being back on the money at 50 yards through several cycles through the ultrasonic, and cleaning this system. So I don't have any worry about having to re-zero this thing. This is just literally a fun gun for 25, 50, 75 yard plinking, and especially when we can get our hands on the lower and have a little bit of fun with that. But we're going to pull the suppressor apart. And this has a half a 28 adapter on it to engage with the threading on the front of the muzzle there. And I've already loosened these components up a slight amount, and I have a beater bar over here. It's a solid copper bar that I'm going to be using to push this core out of the tube itself. Get it started. Just a quick push on this rod I've got set up in the vise. Separates the core from the tube. As you can see, this is a monocore suppressor core. And this is very much like the Centurion that Liberty produces and sells. However, it is a 22 specific bore, and I had Dave custom make this can for me for this particular rig. It's got a lot of internal volume. It's very, very quiet. And surprisingly enough, even after that much 22 going down the bore, you can see the amount of deposits that actually are present inside this particular core. We've got a lot of buildup in the blast chamber here, but for the most part, the can usually stays relatively clean. Normally what I would do with this particular setup here, since it is titanium, it's not it's impervious to the dip, which is a peracetic acid. And I use that quite a bit. If you guys have followed some of the other things that we've done on Instagram and such, you've seen me use the dip in the past. We will be doing a video on the pros and cons of that particular cleaning method in the future, but for this video, we're just going to dunk this in the ultrasonic just to get some of the crud off of it and just put it back together relatively dirty, because a dirty can is actually quieter than a clean can. So remember that. Aside from that, we're just going to pull this thing apart a little bit further here. I'm going to pull the extractor off, and we're going to pull the firing pin out. Uses a cotter pin system just like a standard AR bolt carrier group. Pull the firing pin out. You can see the firing pin is quite skanky and nasty, but it appears to still be in relatively good shape. Where the firing pins typically break is right here at the shoulder, where the pin tip is protruded. There's a spring that is present inside as well to return the firing pin back to the rearward position upon the firing cycle. And a lot of times when these things get really dirty, that pin will get stuck up in there sometimes. Finally got our spring out. A lot of deposit built up in between the spring itself. Very, very nasty. But these are both components that I would definitely keep several laying around if you do have an upper like this or one of the 22 conversion kits for standard AR-15. Now the extractor is just held in by a small hardened pin. Extractor will pop out, and then there's a small spring retaining that in place. And that is basically your complete and broken down 22 conversion bolt assembly. And if you guys remember, we use these US Gun Mat Company mats. These are magnetic mats, and they're very, very handy for maintaining your control over small parts, such as these springs and cotter pins and hardened pins. So what I'm going to do here is just pull a little bit of the carbon deposit and such off of the extractor. And we're just going to examine the extractor just to maintain or make sure that the edge is nice and sharp, not rounded over or anything like that. A lot of the problems that you can have with the 22 with feeding and extraction usually come down to just a worn out extractor, or the spring is worn out, whatever the case is, or you could have a burr on the mouth of the chamber itself. And in that regard, what I typically do is use a small chamber iron, and I don't have it with me currently, but you'll see a shot of it. The chamber iron basically is just a kind of a tapered piece of steel that you drop into the chamber, and you give it just a slight twist, and it literally irons the ring of the mouth of the chamber out, and it just gets rid of any sort of burrs that were developed from dry firing or any other abuse of 22s, because we all know that dry firing is pretty bad with a 22. It can definitely damage the bolt face and such, but chamber iron is there to remedy that situation if you do ever find yourself in it. The extractor is still good. I do keep some of these laying around as well as the springs that are all consumable items. Extra cotter pins are handy to have. Aside from that, recoil spring and what I mentioned previously is about the only thing that you really need to have sitting around. So let's go over to the Sonic and drop all these parts in here, and we're going to show you just how much gunk actually comes off of a dirty AR like this. Let's do that. All right, so we're set up over here with the Lyman Power Pro, and we're just going to dunk the components. Now, I did pull the grip off of this lower here, and because we're going to dunk the entire thing, and we'll just blow it out when we get done, oiled up. All that oil will get down in all the cracks and crevices and such, and it'll be just fine. So this lower is aluminum, and got a little bit of a time constriction that you can use with the ultrasonic with aluminum components, because it will start to eat the anodizing, especially any part that may be scratched or something like that. The ultrasonic action will actually attack that material, and it'll weaken it over time. But 20 minutes in the Sonic isn't really going to hurt anything. We're going to put the buffer and everything nasty in there. All the large components that won't go through the grate here on the basket. And we're going to dunk the titanium tube and the titanium core. Now, these components are Cerakoted. However, Cerakote holds up very well in the Sonic for about 15 to 20 minutes, no more than that. And we've got the temperature set at 100 degrees. So pretty mild for the most part, but the ultrasonic action is going to take care of all this mess here. So let's turn it on, and then we will see what happens. You guys can see this is brand new clean solution. This is some of the Extreme Simple Green right there. Thank you, sir. And we're going to see just how much gunk starts coming off of this sucker. All right, so the Sonic's been running for 20 minutes on the dot. Let's just take a quick peek here and see what our components look like. Oh yeah, look at that. Nice and pretty and clean. We're going to take this back over to the bench. We're going to use some compressed air, blow the water off everything, and then just do a little bit of further inspection. And if there's any other things we need to fine tune on the cleaning, we'll do that over there on the bench, and we'll get everything oiled up and back together, and we'll be good to go. All right, as you can see, the Sonic cleaned up our parts quite nicely. Our suppressor core is still a little bit skanky looking, but for the most part, it's pretty clean. Now, it did not attack this lead buildup inside the blast chamber here. That is definitely a task for the peracetic acid, or you can get in there with hand tools and you can kind of scrape a lot of that out. Like I said, we'll be doing a video on the dip at some point or another to show you guys how all that works. But as you can see, the Cerakote finish is undamaged. This is the tube here. Cleaned up the tube fairly well. We're going to take a brush and a little bit of LPS2 and kind of fine-tune some of the cleaning on a few of these components here. But no damage to the Cerakote. The lower, relatively clean. It did get into the fire control group here and cleaned out in between all these components here. Auto sear, hammer. You can see the wear and tear on this thing. It's been used quite a bit, but ultrasonic really does a good job getting in there. Now, the Magwell still has a little bit of lead kind of built up on the sidewalls here. We're going to take some LPS2 right now, actually, and we're going to just spray some of that down in here. Let it sit for a few moments, and then we're going to take our brush. Just got a soft bristled nylon brush here. Go back to that in a couple of minutes here and just fine-tune that cleaning. Our bolt assembly, you can see a little bit of residual deposits left on the front there. Literally just a little bit of oil or other cleaning solution just to get some of these stubborn spots off. Just a little bit of work will clear all that up. You can go with a more aggressive material for your brush on these steel components. I typically just use a nylon bristle brush just to keep things simple, and that way to make sure that I don't use the wrong material on, say, an aluminum component or something else that definitely will not like that steel brush being rubbed up against it. Take a small pick. You can use it as a scraping tool for some of the stubborn areas. And while it's nice and clean, you can also examine all the parts. Just make sure there's no undue wear and tear, especially like the bolt face and such. You take your pick, run it along the edge of the bolt face. Just make sure there's no lead deposits or anything like that that would impede the function of the bolt in chambering a fresh round when you go to fire it next time. You see that's quite nice. And what we do, I typically have some sort of plastic vessel that I can put all the completed and clean components into. And then I'll just hose everything down inside this with some LPS. And what I'll do after that is take it and I will blow everything off with compressed air. Look at this assembly here. You can see there's still a little bit of residual goo sitting to the side here. Probably require just a little bit of elbow grease to get the rest of that off. And the ultrasonic will do 99% of the work you need it to most of the time. But every now and again, depending on how long you want to leave the components in, if you go for a shorter amount of time, you'll probably have to do just a little bit of labor by hand to get some of these components 100% clean. But steel components like this, stainless steel, you can leave these in a sonic pretty much indefinitely without any sort of worry of damage to the material itself. Since this is uncoated stainless steel, there's no problems there with that. It's just the titanium over time, from what I understand, you don't want to leave titanium in an ultrasonic for too terribly long. It does hold up a lot better than aluminum, obviously, but it's still, I stick with steel or stainless steel, carbon steel, anything like that for long periods in the sonic itself. So that is clean enough. That's good to go. I'm going to oil it up, put it down in a bin. Obviously the anti-bounce weight, there's no problems with that whatsoever. Our auto trip, good coating of oil, recoil spring assembly. Now the ultrasonic works so nicely for cleaning springs. I mean, remember the spring was black earlier just from all the lead deposits and carbon deposits in that blowback upper. Spray it down with a little bit of oil here. Get that sucker in there. our charging handle. Let's give it a quick rub down here with a nylon bristle brush. And you do have some steel components in the rear. You have a spring and a roll pin and your charging handle latch itself. You just want to make sure that you've got good spring tension there. Make sure that the pin hasn't walked out or anything like that. Get a little bit of oil down in that area and we'll blow that through in a moment. Our bolt face here that adapts to the barrel, the feed ramp. Just a tiny bit of lead deposits left on that. This thing has seen a lot of use, guys, but you can see how well that sonic really gets in there and just gets all that junk off of there. And we can take our pick and just gently scrape that little bit of residual right off of the feed ramp there and off of the bolt face here, or the adapter face here. Just wipe that off with a little rag here. And that component there is good to go as well. You guys can see that this is a very easy process with something like a ultrasonic cleaner. I always like to put a little bit of oil on my suppressor cores and such, and then we'll hose all that off as well. The tube doesn't look too bad. We're just going to go ahead and grease it up. I did not throw the adapter in the Sonic. This is definitely something for the dip because it's got all that buildup inside there. I've shot this thing so much that the adapter here has actually just had a tiny little 22 caliber port in there and then kind of a conical shaped buildup of lead. I literally had to get in there with a pick, put this thing in the vise, and then tap out big chunks of that lead and then finish it off in the peracetic acid to get that thing 100% clean. But that was after well over 8,000 to 10,000 rounds. So it takes a long time for all that buildup to happen, but I'd rather the lead build up in this blast area here between where the muzzle of the barrel is right here. This entire chamber is where most of the lead deposits actually accumulate. But then, as we can see, there's not really a whole lot of buildup inside the can and on the baffles themselves. Very, very efficient. That's why I like this can for this particular application. Our buffer, a little bit of oil. I mean, it's cleaned up just fine. Now, I did already clean the smaller components by hand. So we've got the firing pin here. Like I said, you want to inspect the firing pin. Make sure there's no apparent wear and tear or any sort of stress fractures or anything like that going on right here at this ledge. The firing pins are consumable items like I mentioned before, and typically what I do is I'll keep an extra couple of firing pins at least in the grip of, you know, whatever gun that I'm running that 22 upper on at the time. I'll just keep these with me and I'll just keep them handy. Cleaned off the extractor. The extractor is nice and sharp still. Everything's a lot easier to inspect when everything is nice and clean. That's ready to be assembled back into place. And then we're going to just scrape out this lower since it's been sitting for a few moments. Literally a soft bristle brush inside the magazine well will break up the last residual bit of that lead and carbon deposit that was present earlier. And if you want to, you can take this back into the Sonic and literally just dunk it in for just a moment. And that'll clear off all that residual mess and get it out of here and make it a little bit easier to wipe down. Or you could just wipe it down with a soft rag. Get in here with a brush and just clean up a couple of these small, kind of hard to reach areas here. And then inside the buffer tube. And say that's pretty much clean and ready. So what we're going to do is hose it down. And like I said earlier, once you get the air compressor to this is something that we learned a long time ago from Ray. And Ray was an armorer at one of the local military installations around this area for a good long while here in Georgia. And spraying a component down with a bunch of oil and then using the air compressor to blow that oil into all the cracks and crevices really spreads it out. And it also, if you use something like LPS or anything else that is a water displacing oil of sorts, CLP, whatever the case is, it will displace that water out of there and keep the components and all from rusting up. A lot of people worry about water from an ultrasonic getting back behind the castle nut here in the rear plate, but I've never had a single concern of it, never seen rust leaking out of there or anything like that with this particular procedure. I wound up having to take the soft bristle brush and break up some of the deposits that were present still in the receiver here twice, and break them up, go over to the sonic, let it run for about a minute or two, come back over, scrub a little bit more down. I took the pick, had to pick a couple of very stubborn areas off. Still actually one little spot right here. As you can see, just a tiny little pick in action. We'll get that out of there just fine. As you can see too, this receiver has seen a lot of use. You can see the wear and tear on the inside where the bolt group actually travels back and forth inside the receiver there. It just puts a little bit of wear on the aluminum, kind of bitten through the anodizing, but that doesn't cause any problems. It just makes the upper run a little bit smoother, because it's kind of well broken in. You can see the little barrel extension here. Our barrel is nice and clean. If you so choose, you can take a standard cleaning rod with a bristle brush and you can run through this barrel and you can clean the chamber really well. Chamber is nice and clean, don't have any buildup or anything like that in there. It's one of the beauties of the ultrasonic. It really can get down in the barrel and clean out a lot of the carbon and copper deposits and such that are left behind after an extended round count. Everything looks good to go. We're going to get this blown off here, get all the oil blown in, and then we're going to assemble this rifle and get it back together. So we're going to reassemble our bolt here. And this would be the perfect time to replace any springs or other components that are beyond normal wear and tear here. Insert our firing pin. The firing pin does have to be oriented with the groove cut out at 12 o'clock position for the installation of the cotter pin. Double check your extractor tension. Everything's good to go there. Bolt rides in the little chassis here. Oops. I have to put the recoil spring assembly in there first. Recoil spring first. And then the bolt will ride in the little chassis here. Drop that to the rear, hold it in place. And then we're going to insert the collar. And that is the basic assembly for the 22 conversion kit. However, we are going to drop the anti-bounce weight back in place, like such, and the auto trip in place. Charge and handle assembly, and then this will go in receiver just like such, just like normal. Reassemble our suppressor. I've already taken the liberty of reassembling the lower receiver, getting the grip and the buttstock back in place. Quick functions check. And that, my friends, is a very clean AR-22. As you can see, all the parts have been inspected. We made sure that there's no damage to the firing pin. Recoil spring looked fine. The extractor looked fine. Just basic items that you need to be paying attention to when you're cleaning these particular firearms. And the process that we showed you in this video here can be dropped right onto an AR-15 itself. The procedure is exactly the same. However, some of the components are a little bit different, but we thought it'd be fun to show you this since it needed to be cleaned anyways. Now this lower can go back to its home and it can be ready to be made dirty another day. Really appreciate you guys watching this particular video. I want to give a special thank you and shout out to our Patreon supporters and those of you who purchase man cans and apparel and other merchandise over on the store. You guys rock. We could not do what we do without you and our Patreon supporters. If it wasn't for you guys, we would not be able to put this content out there for you. So hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, take care and we'll talk to you soon.